Welcome to BSW's Tech Dive. Tech Dive.
Submerge the ship.
The show goes technically deep into products you care about. The new, the old, the newish. So put on your gear, close up the hatch, and prepare to
Dive. Submerge the ship.
And now, here's John.
Welcome to this edition of BSW Tech Dive. I am John Lynch, Director of Business Development here at BSW USA Broadcast Supply Worldwide. And today's topic is codecs, audio over IP, and a historic company that's been around longer than you might think. A company called APT, which is part of Worldcast, which includes Acreso transmitters. And we've got on board with us today engineer and director of sales for Acreso transmitters and Worldcast and APT in the United States, Tony Peterly. Tony, welcome to the show. And
Hey, John.
First, I got to say this. With a name like Lynch, it's important that APT is an Irish company.
Yeah, and they would ask you to make the distinction that it's a Northern Irish company.
There you go. Okay.
Based out of Belfast, and so they've had some challenges over there since the Brexit. About, are they still part of the EU? Can they still trade with regular Ireland? It's an interesting place, and they have been at the forefront of groundbreaking technology for many years.
But
APT's
actually longer than we think of, because when we start thinking about codecs and things like that, we're talking like the 90s, et cetera.
Right.
We're talking well before that.
When did they introduce the Livewire protocols? Like 2003, I think.
Yeah.
Something like that. So, as far as audio over IP in the plant, and there was some audio over IP delivery, point to point before that. And our first foray was actually for George Lucas, who we built a set of Dolby 5.1 IP audio codecs to move audio around the country. When they were shooting their dailies, they could send the video on the 5.1 surround sound all over the place on these IP codecs. That was 74, 75, something like that. So,
and if
APT
the name doesn't ring a bell, just think Star Wars. There you go.
Yes.
George Lucas.
Indiana Jones.
George Lucas, yes.
Yeah, that's the guy. In fact, we named the codec Skylink in Skywalker Ranch honor.
So anyway, that was the beginning. But let's bring it on up to today and how we got to today with what APT is doing.
Yeah, APT, had a solid reputation. We, built codecs for ISDN and for T1 lines and all that kind of stuff. But more and more IP, of course, as the technology progressed. And we managed to come up with kind of the magic mousetrap right at the point when IP bandwidth was getting really plentiful, but most broadcasters still didn't regard it as reliable enough for broadcast because of dropouts and packet losses and network disconnections and whatnot. So we introduced, and this is almost 10 years ago now, a technology called SureStream, which is a redundant streaming technology. We send the necessary data more than once, preferably across multiple internet or network pathways, preferably using different multiple providers on each end of the connection. It makes for a very robust connection because if any packet or disconnection happens on one of the streams, the data that you need to correct that is already in the buffer from one of the other redundant streams. We set up a Belfast to Miami link using just cheap basic DSL, whatever kind of internet connections we could get on each end, and ran that 15 kilohertz stereo audio across the Atlantic for almost 6 months without losing a single packet of audio.
Wow.
We've done cellular streaming, 4G, LTE, 5G from the parking lot of a Miami Dolphins football game with 70,000 media-obsessed fans in the stands.
All shooting up, linking their own thing. Hey, Mom, I'm here,
Yeah, it's like, here's the celebrities we saw in the stands. It's like nobody pays attention to the game. And we were streaming flawless audio from that parking lot over the cellular modems to Belfast. It's SureStream has proven to be so much so the defining way to secure network audio transmissions, or actually any streaming content, that within 3 or 4 years of us introducing SureStream, every major competitor in the market for codecs had something that either looked similar or operated in a similar way. So it was kind of gratifying to know that we had the right answer, and we had it first.
Well, and on top of that, this falls into the category of what in the John Lynch world of engineering, which is non-engineering, the important thing, the one primary job, whether you're doing audio over IP or you're doing an Acreso transmitter, it's stay on. That's
Yes.
it.
It's got to work. Exactly.
All right. So now something else that a couple other things that they've come up with over at APT. Tell us about APT MPX.
Right. So recently it's become of interest to broadcasters to be able to generate a single composite signal, a single processor, and be able to export that single composite signal to multiple transmitter sites, either for main and boosters, main and backup, single frequency networks, what have you. So sending composite audio over IP has been a kind of a buzzword and a developing market trend. And obviously, if you're doing sampling it in a linear fashion, a composite signal can cost you many megabytes per second, 5-6 megabytes per second, maybe more. And some connections don't have that kind of bandwidth. So the search was to find a way that we could reduce the bandwidth of an IP composite signal without reducing the quality. And so rather than disassemble the signal and mash all of its various components around and put it all back together at the other end, we treat the composite signal holistically as a single analog entity that it is, sample the entire thing, and use a variable rate compression to squeeze it down to, I think we're at 900 kilobits a second now for the full composite signal.
Wow.
And possibly some other developments along the way I'm not at liberty to disclose yet.
Okay, well, we'll deal with that in another edition of BSW Tech Dive.
Yes.
Down the road. Anyway, so these are developments that you've created, that APT has created from the need generated by specifically broadcasters meeting a need, like I said, to stay on.
Correct. The other big trend now is the addition or the increase in the number of single frequency networks that we see in the U.S. It's a more common practice in Europe. And so it's something we have a great deal of experience with. But the idea of having either one main and then several filler transmitters, or several sort of quasi-main transmitters, all broadcasting on the same frequency with overlapping signals. So it's a fairly common technology. It's not impossible to do, but to do well and to minimize what they call the mush zones, where those signals overlap, the audio, well, of course, you've got to synchronize the frequency, which you could do with a 10 megahertz clock from the GPS. But the audio has to be very finely synchronized in order to have the best quality of reception where those signals overlap. And that's where our SFN technology called SynchroStream comes in. It allows you to send audio from one composite or audio from one point to multiple points, and finally adjust the delay at each of those receive points, so that when the audio goes out the transmitter and propagates into the reception area and reaches the overlap area, everything is going to be lined up so you have the minimum interference and the best signal quality of the single frequency network.
Now, the question then becomes, and this is why what we call a pre-sales conference is so important, because today it's not just plug and play. We got to know exactly what you're going to be doing, and that's why we encourage our clients to call us, and then we can conference in with you or can refer them directly to you, but get the actual information across, because there's, in many cases, 3, 4, 5 different versions of what they may want to do, and we want to narrow it down to the best one.
Right, exactly. Single frequency networks, they're not the easiest thing in the world. You've got to identify and get licenses for those multiple transmitter sites. But regardless of that, the physical layout and what you're doing with directional antennas and the terrain and all of the kind of factors that go into the overall planning of a single frequency network, the precise timing of the audio is something you're going to have to manage one way or another for it to be successful. And that's where the APT codecs with SynchroStream can really help out.
APT from BSWUSA.com. Tony Peterly, thank you very much for the visit and being part of this edition of BSW Tech Dive. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, John.
Baby, turn out